Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I've got another viewer's request for you, and today's request comes in from Bobby G, who asks, can you make a bridge pickup of a Stratocaster sound like a P90 bridge pickup using the amp's EQ and gain, EQ pedal, etc. So I thought that could be a really interesting challenge for me in a video. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to use this guitar here as my sort of bass tone. This is a Gibson Les Paul Jr. with a Monty's 54 P90 in it. And what I'm going to do in 3 separate challenges is to see how close I can get this pickup to sound to it, which is a Fralin Real 54. So they're both kind of models from the same year, but of course these two guitars sound very different. So how close can we get this bridge pickup to sound to that P90? So first and foremost, let's set the amp pretty clean and flat and see what the fundamental differences are between the sound of this Strat and that Les Paul. So they're pretty different sounding right off the bat, right? Now, 4 things that really stood out to me about that. Firstly, the P90 is much louder than the Strat. It has a hotter output, or at least a perceived hotter output. Secondly, the P90 has much more low end. It's much more thumpy low down. It really hits you in the chest sitting here in front of the amp. The Strat sounds quite thin and weedy in comparison to that P90. Thirdly, the mid-ranges on both those pickups are completely different. The P90 is much more kind of barky and boxy in the lower mids, and the Strat is much more kind of bitey in the sort of 2 to 3K mids. So the mid-range character is completely different. And fourth, and probably quite obviously, the Strat is much brighter up top than the P90. It's much more glassy. Now, the first thing I would do to compensate for that difference in tone is something I can't do today because I haven't got one of these things here, but I have made a video about this before, which I'll link to up there now, which is you can buy metal base plates to fit underneath Strat pickups. And essentially what that does is make it one step closer to a telly pickup. It kind of boosts the output a little bit and boosts the low end. It just makes the bridge pickup that they're typically used for on a Strat much more sort of beefy sounding, a little bit closer to a sort of humbucker or P90. So if I was trying to make a Strat bridge pickup sound more like that P90, that's the first thing I would do, but I don't have any of those to hand today. So as challenge number 1 then, I want to see how close I can get the Strat to sound to the P90 using just an EQ pedal. Now this is the pedal I've got here. This is a vintage one. This is an old Boss GE10, which is a 10-band EQ with an output level, boost or cut. So I'm going to have a little play around with this and see just how close we can match the Strat to the P90 using just an EQ pedal. So without further ado, here we go. So we can get pretty close using just a 10-band EQ pedal, can't we? I think there's still a sort of difference in the mid-range that I just couldn't dial in with the bands I had available, but overall I think we could get fairly close using just this pedal. And if you look at the shape that I've drawn on the EQ here, you can see exactly what I had to do. So I had to boost the low end and the lower mids and then cut the top whilst boosting the output level to match the kind of outputs. So yes, you can get a Strat to sound fairly close to a P90 using just a 10-band EQ. Now, as the second challenge, what I wanted to do is use just the controls on the amp. So the amp I'm using today is a Hughes and Kettner Puretone, and the reason I chose this amp today is because it has this very special growl control, which isn't a gain as you might assume. What the growl basically does is you can blend between a completely EQ sound on one side and completely dropping the EQ out of the circuit on the other. And that has the effect of boosting the output because the EQ is subtractive, so as you dial it out, the output level goes up, but also it's much more mid-rangey and boxy. You get a lot more thump in the lower mids. So I'm going to have a little play around with the amp and adjust the EQ, bring that growl up to add some more kind of thickness in the low mids. I might have to drop the volume slightly because the volume increase as you turn the growl up is quite extreme. But I want to see, just using a 3-band EQ and that growl control, whether using just an amp and no pedals at all, we can get these two guitars sounding a bit closer. So let's have a look. So again, we can get pretty close, right, just by adjusting the 3-band EQ on the amp and using that magic growl control. So we can add some of the low end back in, we can add some of the honky lower mids back in using the growl and the mid control, and then shelve off some of the treble to get rid of the glassiness of the Strat. So we can make those two guitars sound fairly alike. There's still some differences in the mid-range that you can't quite compensate for, but they can get fairly alike just by adjusting a 3-band EQ on an amp. So as a final part of this video then, what I wanted to do is try some gainy sounds. And I'll be completely honest here, I've already shot this segment, so I know exactly what's about to happen, but I wanted to talk you through how I put this together. So I put the P90 into the amp and turned the amp up so that it was driving to get a nice crunch sound going on. And then I turned the amp back down so that it was clean and tried to emulate that using some pedals with the Strat. So the pedals I decided to use were a Tube Screamer type pedal and a Klon type pedal chained together, both set with the gains at 0, so they are kind of as least gainy as they can possibly be. So we're trying to use it for tone shaping more than gain. Now the Tube Screamer type pedal I use is the Jam Tube Dreamer 58, and the Tube Dreamer does kind of shelve off some of the high end, which we want with the Strat, especially with the EQ set down a little bit, and it adds a nice bump in the lower mids, so we can kind of compensate for that sort of low bump that's in the P90 that's not in the Strat. And then running it into the Klon type pedal, that adds a bit more bite to it while still shelving off some of the glassy highs. So both those pedals are mid-pushed pedals, but in different bands of the frequencies. We can get a much wider mid-boost chaining the two together. Now that pretty much worked to get the tone shaping, but what we were lacking then was low end, because both those pedals shelve off quite a lot of low end, so the sound was a bit thin in comparison. So I then ran those two pedals into the Origin Effects Revival Drive, which was set as clean as I could possibly get it. It loves to gain up that pedal, but I set it as clean as I could. And the low end on that pedal is absolutely colossal. So I'm hoofing the low end with the Revival Drive and slamming the mids into the front end to make it honk a little bit, whilst those two first pedals are also shelving off some of those glassy highs of the Strat. So let's have a listen to how all that sounds. there we are then. Now again, we can get pretty close to the sound of the P90 into a cranked amp using those pedals with the Strat. Now there are differences. To my ears, the pedals are fairly compressed. It's a much more dynamic and touch sensitive experience using the amp cranked up than it is those pedals. But we can get fairly close, you know, so if you have a Strat and you wish you had a P90, you can compensate by adding some low end and some low mids and shelving off some of those highs. And you can use the guitar's volume control as well. I, on my Strat, wire the bottom tone control to the bridge pickup rather than the middle, so you can kind of roll some of that glassiness off as well. That's a really nice tip as well if you are finding a Strat a little bit too sort of bright and aggressive. So yes, Bobby, you can make, within reason, a Strat bridge pickup sound like a P90. So I hope that was an interesting video, guys. I really enjoyed putting that one together. I love those sort of challenges. So if you have any more requests of guitar pickups or guitar types into certain pedals, certain amps that you'd like to see explored, drop them in the comments below, and if I can make one of these videos exploring that, I absolutely will do so. And please do carry on subscribing to this channel as well. I know I always say it, but it really does make a big difference when you subscribe. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.